Jury selection starts tomorrow as the trial of George Zimmerman for second-degree murder gets underway. Attorneys on both sides will have to narrow down a pool of hundreds of potential jurors, just down to 6. Joining me now is Arise News legal contributor Seema Iyer and veteran prosecutor and deputy chief of staff at the San Francisco Mayor's Office, Paul Henderson. And before we get started, I want to let all of you know that George Zimmerman has sued NBC Universal, of course, the parent company of this network, for defamation, but the company has strongly denied his allegations. But as we get to this, Seema, I'll start with you first. Cases are sometimes won or lost in the jury selection phase, if you think about it that way. So what is it that each side is going to be working for?
That's a great point. The defense is going to try to make sure that everybody on that jury has an opinion about Trayvon Martin, that everybody in that jury pool, rather, has heard about the text messages, has seen the photographs, and they are going to try to get people who have that skewed opinion, that perhaps believe in self-defense. That's what they want.
Okay, and then the prosecution, how many can they say, no, we disagree to this person that you want? How many times can they do that?
They can. There's a certain amount of challenges that each side has, and it really depends on the Florida statute at this point, and I am not certain about that, but since it is second-degree murder, it's probably around 15 challenges each.
Okay.
Now, you can challenge someone, but you can't challenge someone because of their race or sexual orientation or gender.
But believing there's a prejudice, they can say we don't want that, or?
Well, prejudice is a different department altogether. So if you are prejudiced and if you say, I cannot be fair, you are automatically disqualified from sitting on any jury.
Okay. So, Paul, should Mark O'Mara, who, of course, is Zimmerman's attorney, be asking to change the venue of this trial? Is that the only way they can get a fair one?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think this is a nationwide case that has caught nationwide attention. You know, it's just like we talked about earlier. Both sides are going to be looking to really try and discover, when they pull their panel, what people know about this case and how they feel about this case before they're selected. The prosecution is, if I were handling this case, one of the things that I would really be looking for would be jurors that had some experience in dealing with stereotypes, because I think there's an undercurrent dealing with stereotypes that surrounds this case that I think is going to be really relevant as the evidence unfolds.
But you know what's interesting here, Paul? The court has denied a motion to sequester potential jurors during the selection phase. I mean, it hasn't decided yet if the jury of 6 eventually selected will be sequestered. So if they are, how would that impact the trial?
Well, if they are, it would impact the trial because they have to be kept away from all media analysis, right? And so we already know that this is a case of national attention. And so the court does not want, and apparently the advocates, some of the advocates, don't want jurors to be influenced in hearing what public sentiment is, what the experts are saying outside of the courtroom about the evidence that they're hearing, because everyone's going to be watching the hearing and watching the evidence as it comes in. They want the jurors to be able to evaluate it independently based on their own experiences in the courtroom and not have an influence from what they may read in the newspaper, in a magazine, see on television, or hear from their friends and family.
Yeah. You know, Seema, yesterday the hearing was all about whether or not to allow that 911 tape in as admissible for evidence. The judge did not reach a conclusion and has actually postponed that decision-making process. So, Seema, who does that benefit more? Which side?
I think at this point it benefits the defense because you're still left open with that self-defense issue, that if it was George Zimmerman screaming, then we have more to make a foundation for the self-defense charge, which is that Trayvon was the initial aggressor. Trayvon started the fight. So everything in this scenario benefits the defense.
Yeah. Paul, if the tape is ruled inadmissible and both sides are restricted from using these allegations from Zimmerman's past or pictures and texts allegedly from Martin's cell phone as evidence, how does this case go about being tried?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, and when you're talking about the tape, I think there's a two-prong analysis. Because one, the court will determine whether or not the audio tape will be admitted independently. And I think that there's a high likelihood that the jurors will end up hearing that audio tape. The bigger fight is whether or not the experts will be used in regards to that tape. And again, there's two issues. One, whether or not their enhancements to the tape will be allowed to be played, and whether or not they use the standard procedure and scientific methods and what the audio tape has been. And then also whether or not they will give their own expert opinion as to what's on that tape.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the real fight is going to be. But I think, everyone can listen to the tape and hear what they hear.
Right.
And then the lawyers will argue. What the court is taking so long to flesh out is whether or not they're going to allow experts on both sides to come in and say, well, this is what I heard on the tape as an expert.
Yeah.
And so that's where the real fight is going to be. And that's what I think is taking so long to make a decision.
May I ask you very quickly, because we're out of time here.
Yeah.
Would you put George Zimmerman on the stand? If you can give me just a yes, no. Paul, you?
Yeah, he's got to.
No.
He's got an affirmative defense with self-defense. He has to.
Okay,
Has
you're a
to.
yes.
That's not true, because all of the statements that he said thus far to police, to media, all of that has a foundation that lays for the self-defense charge.
Okay.
He doesn't need to testify, and he'd only ruin it if he does.
All right, well,
Done.
dissenting opinions, not surprisingly. Seema Iyer and Paul Henderson, thank you both so much. Welcome back to Weekends with Alex Witt. Nearly 16 months after the death of Trayvon Martin, jury selection officially begins at 9 a.m. tomorrow in the trial of George Zimmerman, the man charged with killing him. Let's go to NBC's Carrie Sanders, who's monitoring the story from Sanford, Florida. With a hello to you, Carrie. What are you hearing?
Well, hello, Alex. 500 people have received jury summons to show up beginning tomorrow here at the courthouse. That's an unusually large number, which is reflective of the high-profile nature of this case. From that 500, probably over the next 2 weeks, it's expected they will eventually pick the 6 jurors who will sit on this case.
So your first name is George? Yes.
During a videotaped police interview, 29-year-old George Zimmerman admits he shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin.
I grabbed my gun and I aimed it at him and fired one shot.
But he has pled not guilty to second-degree murder.
He said, yo, you got a problem? And I turned around and I said, no, I don't have a problem, man.
As George Zimmerman walked detectives through the events of that February night last year, he acknowledged he shot Trayvon Martin.
And I just grabbed my firearm and I shot him one time.
He admits he followed the 17-year-old that rainy night.
There's a real suspicious guy.
But in its probable cause affidavit, state prosecutors say Trayvon Martin was profiled by George Zimmerman.
I think the state has a very weak case. I think they're trying to build a case of guilt upon my client when he obviously acted in self-defense.
The night of the shooting death, Trayvon Martin had gone to a nearby 7-Eleven to pick up an Arizona iced tea and a bag of Skittles. Police say he was weeding a route through the neighborhood, headed back to his father's girlfriend's condo. And despite what a police dispatcher said to George Zimmerman,
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
the neighborhood watch leader followed on foot. Then there was a commotion, and several residents called 911.
911, do you need police, fire, or medical?
But no one saw who set off the confrontation. Who was the aggressor? How was it that George Zimmerman's pistol ended up being fired? How did Zimmerman sustain injuries to his head?
You have George Zimmerman, who's alive. You have Trayvon Martin, who's dead, who's not here to tell his story. Of course, he's going to blame the victim.
Trayvon Martin's parents say all they've wanted is a day in court.
This was a minor by any terms. It wasn't an adult in another adult. So Trayvon thought as a 17-year-old, like, why is this guy following me?
While it may take 2 weeks or longer to pick a jury, all of the potential jurors' identities will remain a secret by order of the judge. Alex?
Yeah. And Carrie, Mark O'Meara, Zimmerman's attorney, has asked for a delay. Any reaction to that over in Sanford?
Well, yes, there have been repeated requests for what they call in court a continuance because he feels that he needs more time because of evidence that was provided to him, he argues, on a delayed schedule. In Florida, they have a reciprocal discovery, which means that unlike a Perry Mason moment where there can be a surprise, in Florida, the state and the defense gather all of their own evidence, and then they swap it back and forth, so they all know what's coming at each other. The defense has claimed here that the state withheld some of that discovery till late in the game, and it's made it harder for them to prepare. But thus far, every time that the defense has requested a delay in the opening of the trial, the judge has ruled we're moving forward.
Right. Okay. NBC's Carrie Sanders in Florida. Thanks, Carrie. Well, George Zimmerman has sued NBC Universal, the parent company of this network, for defamation. The company has strongly denied his allegations.